Today, we're discussing the very hot topic of signals and triggers in B2B, what they mean for marketers, sales, and leaders, and how to use them. Welcome to the B2B Playbook. We built this channel for small B2B marketing teams who want to drive more revenue for their business. Every week, we're showing you how to create more demand for your brand step by step using our 5Bs framework. So if you're time poor, resource strapped, but you still want to make a big impact on your business, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below so you don't miss an episode. Welcome back to the B2B Playbook. Today, we're discussing the very hot topic of signals and triggers in B2B, what they mean for marketers, sales, and leaders, and how to use them. We are into season 6 of the podcast. We spent seasons 1 to 5 giving away our 5Bs framework for demand generation. Go back and listen to these if you haven't already. We release our strategy step by step. Kevin, please, for those who are new to the podcast, let them know what the 5Bs framework for demand gen is all about.
Listeners, the 5Bs framework is our framework for looking at how to do demand generation and B2B marketing in general. They involve 5Bs, 5 steps, and they are be ready, be helpful, be seen, be better, and be the best. We set the scene and be ready by deeply understanding our customers, in particular our dream customers. And then in Be Helpful, we guide you through how to develop relationships of trust with them online. In Be Seen, we look to amplify that level of trust and the content and how to push that out into the focus areas that you really need to nail. In Be Better, we look at how to optimize the process you've then built in your B2B marketing. And finally, in Be the Best, we look at some of the advanced strategies and tactics used by the guys at the bigger end of town and how you can implement them in your own marketing.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kevin. I think that today's topic probably sits in that fourth B, be better, which is all about optimizing processes, because it's really looking at what triggers, signals, points of data are out there for us to identify as marketers, ingest that, and then give sales a much better idea as to who is more likely to be ready to buy from you or who is more likely to be open to having that next conversation. So as we said, today we're discussing triggers and signals in B2B and what they mean for marketing, sales, leadership, and how to use them. And just some context around this conversation, Kev, why I think it's important to discuss this now. Look, companies are spending so much money on signals and triggers to really try and predict, as we said, when sales should reach out. The reason for this is they want to try and accelerate demand. So there's some awareness of their product. There's some interest in what they're doing. They want to identify who those people are and they want to make their outbound more successful. And so examples of these signals might be things like leads generated from ebooks, third-party signals from Bombora or Trust Radius, data that people buy, MQA scoring from ABM platforms. You've got, of course, website de-anonymization from Clearbit or iB2B or Factors. You've got things like job change signals in LinkedIn Sales Navigator. All those kinds of things are great examples of triggers and signals. And there are so many others out there. That's just an idea of these different points of data we can track that give us an indication that, hey, maybe someone is more in market. So, Kev, I've got it up here on our whiteboard. And for anyone listening, please go and check us out on YouTube. We have diagrams, my whiteboard to really help nail home, hopefully, all these points that Kevin and I are making. And what we have on the whiteboard, Kev, is all these little dots and crosses. These are all signals. Believe it or not, that's what I've decided to indicate these are signals. There are so many things out there, right? So many things we can track, like when someone makes a decision or might be interested, that could be researching a particular keyword. As we said, it could be a job change. It could be visiting a website. All these stuff is signals. It becomes up to the marketer to try and find a way to try and digest and process these. And so I've got here a little marketer and they're processing those signals. They then create basically a list of accounts based on these actions to then hand off to sales to say, hey, these people are right for you to either email, call, text, whatever it might be that sales are doing, all in the effort to really try and accelerate demand. And so signals can exist across the funnel, and it's the marketer's job to really try and process these. Today, we're going to discuss, Kev, also about how signals are really nothing new. It's not this new thing that other marketers out there might try and have us believe, but also what the right way to use them is, because I think the way that people are using them currently, it's very tech and platform focused rather than going back to the fundamentals. So we're going to give you a bit of a framework for how to use them properly as well. Again, Kevin, where signals exist, They exist across the full funnel, and we can try and track them across the full funnel. I'm not saying which part in the funnel it's best to track them. I'm just saying that really, if someone is visiting your website, you can capture that information, track it further down the funnel. If you have their contact details, you can do that through your CRM because it identifies them through their email address. If you don't have it, as we said, you can use website de-anonymization data like Clearbit or B2B to identify that. If we have a good idea that companies are more likely to be in market if they fit a certain firmographic profile and they start hiring for a new role, like who knows, like a new CRO, then that might be an indicator they might be having the problem that you can help with. These are all signals that are much earlier on in the funnel. And I think that's just something I want to drive home, Kev, is that these signals can exist across the funnel. Do you want to maybe tell us, Kev, a little bit about signals themselves and how they're actually nothing new? And this is something that our friend Adam Mandarovich continuously hones in on us as someone who has been in the sales space for 20 plus years.
Yeah, of course, George. Listeners, really, if we stop to think about it, signals, triggers, whatever you like to call them, these days we can think about them in the digital sense, what actions people taking online. But before things went digital, there were plenty of signals in the offline world as well. As you mentioned, Adam has talked us through some of the things that SDRs, BDRs used to do in old school sales to figure out some of these signals about who might be interested in your services. So they do things like scouring newspapers to see which companies are potentially hiring and which companies are hiring in your particular target department in particular. They also look at things like, is it a new role that was created within the last 3 months? Is it something that's been opened again recently? People in new roles tend to be more open to supply changes as opposed to those who are in roles for quite some time. And also newly created roles tend to have more leniency around what they bring to the table and what they could be purchasing as part of their toolkit. They also look at things like, are they hiring at other departments that might be front-end staff like marketing, sales, customer success. All these things tell you that a particular company has budget and they may be interested in your particular industry that you're servicing with your product or service. So in the old school days, they used to look up newspapers and job listings to glean some of this information. They might even talk to customers, believe it or not, call up your customers and ask them what's happening, ask potential customers what's happening in their own businesses as well. And the idea is that this will give you a list of companies that are more likely to be in market for your particular product or service and have budget for it. And then you can go into that list to target specifically on people you want to get across in your sales process. That used to be the old way of doing things. So obviously all these things are triggers and signals and it's nothing new. But in today's online world, a lot of these signals have changed in their nature, in the particular form that they take. And now we have all kinds of fancy databases and ways to source these triggers and signals and to record them and to gather them in your databases.
I always love hearing that from Adam, Kev, and just a constant reminder that none of this stuff is new. Like, these are just good fundamental go-to-market principles that so often get lost because we become obsessed by tech and platforms, because these tech and platforms, Kev, they have huge marketing budgets and they all convince us that it's their tech or platform that's the solution, when in fact, there are just these sound foundational principles that we need to think of first before we choose the tech platform to help us execute that. So that's now, Kev, we're talking about when we say, where do marketers go wrong? When we speak to them and work with them, when we see them choosing these signals and triggers. And it's that they become so obsessed with the data point or the signal itself, they forget to ask why that data point or why that signal is relevant in the first place. And the outcome as well, Kev, of acting on that data point or signal isn't really tracked enough. So what I'm saying is all those signals, they're not really made equal. If someone visits a website page of ours around demand generation and what is demand generation, I can see that through Clearbit. I can see that through factors. I might even get their personal LinkedIn from B2B. that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to join our 12-week demand gen course, the B2B incubator, right? They might just be gathering more information around that. We don't exactly know where they're at in that 5 stages of awareness framework. And so it's only by testing, doing some gentle outreach and seeing of those that visited that page that I then reached out to, how many of those ended up turning into opportunities down the line. It's only once we test that we can start to see a correlation between the two, that we see, hey, that was actually worth the effort. Otherwise, what are we doing? We're just collecting signals and we're shoveling more crappy leads onto sales, totally burning that bridge with them because we're wasting their time again. And then it's going to take quite a while to get that back.
Yeah, George, I think one of the most striking examples of this I've seen recently is a particular account I was looking at. In the paid channels, they were actually optimizing towards anyone who had in fact been on a page that described their particular product or service. So one of the products or services, if anyone had gone onto their landing page to look at the details of that particular product or service, that was a target for this particular business in their paid ads. They have tracking in place for form submissions. They have tracking in place for things like actual outreach for interest in a particular product or service and inquiry to set up a meeting. But instead of just targeting those at that particular stage and tailoring messages for other signals and other steps in that funnel that you just showed earlier in the piece, they were actually optimizing towards anyone who had been on the product page itself as well. So you can imagine the sales process from there would be very different. The messaging that they're getting slammed with on their paid activity would be very different. And they really shouldn't be seeing some of these ads that are going to them, which are pushing a hard sell when they've just seen a product or service. So this is the kind of thing that is prevalent in the industry because, as you said, George, that's where generally marketers go wrong. They track everything. They try and collect information on every single signal that could be relevant, and then they mass target everyone with the same message that is very close to a hard sell, or they pass them all on to sales directly to outreach. And that's just not efficient. As you can imagine, 95% of these people who have just been browsing are not actually interested or even ready to buy your service or product. It's much better to put them in a nurture funnel, to put them into a content funnel and a content feed so that they start to develop an understanding of what your product, what your brand is actually about, and whether that's actually relevant. And then hone in on the signals that actually indicate intent to purchase. So maybe they then submit a contact form and you'll see the contact numbers rise, those applications rise over time if you're doing this right, if you're nurturing them through. And actually, it's a lot cheaper to get that nurture happening as opposed to blasting the 90% of the market that's not ready to buy with the same sales message. You're just going to put everyone offside before they're ready to buy.
Yeah, it's a great example, Kevin. I think that's why that sales need to be equipped to be able to educate and nurture and not just sell themselves. Because if they're going outbound and they're making points of contact based on signals you've given them, okay, like that's not always going to be perfect. It's actually going to take quite a while before we start to find a really strong correlation between what signals people are giving us and which ones make them more ready to buy. And in that time, how much better is it if sales can have a really productive conversation, an actual consultative conversation that gives them helpful educational material that helps them with their problem right now that they're experiencing, to build that trust, to lead them one step further along that 5 stages of awareness and help them getting closer to being ready to buy, much rather than being like, are you ready to buy this? And then saying no, and then sales being, okay, I'll just reach back out in 6 months again.
And that's exactly the point you were making before, George, about that difference in quality of signals. There are certain signals that are great to show that someone is ready to go into that sales process, that is ready for more nurture content, or they're just ready to get to know your brand a little better. So put them into a marketing content funnel instead. And that nicely leads on to our next point, which is that marketers tend to go wrong because they also stop getting these triggers and signals and understanding the quality differences in those signals from customers directly in the form of customer interviews. George, maybe you can take us through that.
Yeah, sure thing. And this extract is from an article written by Ryan Paul Gibson, where he lists a huge number of customer interview questions. And this is a section on buying triggers, questions you can ask your customers to find out what their triggers are. And so rather than going to these platforms first and seeing what signals are available and picking them, what we should do is we should instead speak to our best customers and find out from speaking to them, from asking strategic questions, what actually triggered their search in the first place and what happened within the company. And then from there, you can start to try and match those signals to the databases, the platforms that actually have those. So, some questions that Ryan asks are, what were you doing before using the product or solution? If you're helping to solve a particular problem, what were you doing before using our product or solution? Walk me through the first time you had an issue or a pain with that particular thing. What were you doing or trying to do when this happened? So we're really trying to get into their head and understand what were their actions they were taking, what was happening within that company when this problem arose. Maybe it was because the company started growing because of XYZ. And so then all of a sudden, the team of 3 marketers went to a team of 10 marketers. Maybe it was because you hired a chief revenue officer. Maybe it was because you raised a round of funding and you're in this particular industry, which means that X, Y, and Z happens. But you're going to find out all that information by asking these questions. Another great one is, when did you realize the old way wasn't working? When were you forced to change? What actually forced you to change from doing something the old way to the new way? What was that event that happened? Was it that like your quarterly report was coming up and you were forced to report and show that the old way wasn't working? And so you had to have a strategic plan for the new way? What was it that forced this change? Who did you speak to about this challenge? Who did you speak with? That's another great question because it gives you an idea as to who else is involved in this decision-making process. And maybe they have their own set of triggers as well, things and information that they want to find out. So for us, Kev, look, pretty often people who do join our demand gen program, I'm sure a lot of them have checked out our content around demand generation, trying to understand what it is and trying to get a basic framework down. So if I speak to a lot of people who've joined our program, that was absolutely a strong touch point for them, was that they came across our what is demand generation page, how to measure demand generation, an introduction to our demand generation framework, because these are all questions and things they want answers to before deciding that, hey, demand generation is a really important strategy for our business moving forward. And so then all of a sudden we know that we can grab signals around that. And they're signals that we own, which is fantastic because we cover them on our website.
George, I think there's a lot of parallels between the questions that Ryan has outlined in this particular article and what Adam's been telling us from the sales side in his process about cataloging the market. So importantly, Adam tells us to catalog the market first to figure out who's actually in your full market, your total serviceable market, who has the actual potential to purchase from you or eventually purchase from you, and then to ask the series of questions very similar to those that Ryan has laid out here to figure out what those trigger points, what those events happen in and around that purchase decision so that you can have that full understanding of what you should build towards in terms of content, in terms of touch points with the particular dream customers that you want to get across the line, so that over time you build this consistent playbook of contact points and information that you can put out there at the right place at the right time to have them nurtured through and understand exactly why your product or service is perfect for them. And so it's important to do that process of cataloging, figuring out who's in the market and figuring out what their trigger points are specifically. So you're not just spraying the field, you're not going to market and trying to figure out based on some digital signals and intent triggers that you're picking up along the way in these big software platforms without that qualitative context that's specific to your particular market to help you narrow down your efforts and resources to really hone in on your dream customers and how they in particular behave.
Kevin, just to tie these 3 things together, and my whiteboard has crashed, so I just sketched something out. Here, can you see that all right, Kevin? We might have to turn it around in post-production and flip it around. But looking at this, I've got a pie chart up, basically, listeners. And what I'm showing is we've got a circle, which is your ICP. They're your ideal customers. They're the ones that you're really trying to nail down as a segment. Within that, you're going to use triggers to basically try and pull a list of companies that really fit that segment and are more likely to be in market based on the conversations that you've had and based on what you understand about what is more likely to make someone in market versus not being in market. You can then segment that even further by cataloging those people. So those people who you believe have expressed some kind of intent that are more likely to be in market, catalog them. And what that means, just as Adam Mandarovich told us, it's about literally getting someone to call those clients, say, hey, I'm not here to sell you. I just want to find out more about if you are in market for this particular product or solution. Who are you using? What do you love about it? What do you hate about it? When do you come off contract? Do we have permission to circle back when you go out to tender because we think we have something that could really help, and getting permission to circle back? And so then we started from this big overall ICP list where, yeah, you should try and generate demand amongst it, but we want to get more and more targeted. And that's how triggering and that's how cataloging the market all fits together to help us focus our limited time, budget, and resources on those who are most likely to buy from us.
There you go, listeners. We're literally putting into action what we've been talking about this episode, which is to go back to old school signals and blend them in with a new tech. New tech doesn't always work, so we have to go back to the drawing board and literally drawing on a piece of paper, as George just did there. Key takeaways for this episode: make sure to not start with the tools and tech. Start by talking to your dream customers to understand their triggers. Then find the most efficient way to gather that data for your prospective customers. And make sure then to test and see which triggers correlate with the best results as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, listeners, as always, you can find links to everything that we discussed in the show notes. And Kevin and I are just so grateful that every week more and more marketers tune in every Monday to the B2B Playbook. If we can ask one thing, it would be to please pass the show on to someone who you think would get value from it. Also, make sure you check us out on YouTube. We have all kinds of helpful whiteboards, diagrams when they work. We always do our best in post to fix it up if something crashes like we will today. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you so much, listeners. Please pass it on to someone who you think would find it helpful. We really, really appreciate it. Take care. Catch you next week.
Thank you, George. Thank you, listeners. Catch you all next week.
A quick note before you go, listeners. You can find more great content and get in touch with us at theb2bplaybook.com.
Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and our newsletter while you're there to get the latest news, tips, and resources from our playbook.
We'll be back the same day and same time with another episode next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the B2B Playbook. Remember, successful B2B marketing starts with the buyer.